Okay, Professor Tootle, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Great, I love that. I'd like to skip everything that's happened in the last week, and we met last week, so there's been a lot that happened in the last week, but I really want to get to the topic at hand, and then maybe we'll do a catch up on other stuff if we deem it important, if we have time. Is that okay? We don't usually do
Yeah.
that. We usually do
Uh,
small talk. I just like to get right to the heart of the matter.
yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, we are talking DEI, and then throw in racism and throw in some other related things. But it's basically DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm only 59 years old. I don't remember another time where a president has mandated something so clearly and so forcefully and so repetitively in a variety of different ways on social media, in speeches, in real executive orders, and follow up with staff and follow up questions with people that you are striking anything that has anything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, completely striking it, not just like modifying it or thinking about it. No, if it has a hint of diversity, equity, inclusion in the federal government, it is gone. If you do business with the federal government, it is gone. If you contract with the federal government, it is gone. It is really kind of interesting to see to see President Trump, to your points of past shows, be so clear and so consistent on an issue. Do you agree or disagree with that? Is it gone?
Um, no, well, it's complicated because on one hand, if you're asking if he's saying those things, then the answer is yes. But
Okay.
what's not clear is if what he's doing to undo it is actually going to be effective in the long
Will
term.
actually work. Okay, well,
Yeah.
we'll spend a lot of the show on that. Let's
Okay.
not go to the details yet. Do you Is racism still alive in America today?
Yes.
Okay, good. We're on the same page on that. How about is it? There's two different words: misogynism, misogyny, and what's the other word?
So sexism, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, is that still alive today? Are there people that really don't like the other genders?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there almost hatred towards trans, or is that too strong?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, a lot of my liberal friends are saying that we live in a fascist state right now, John, and you got your head in the sand. Please stop talking about whatever you're talking about because some of it's okay, but really, we live in a fascist state. It's right in front of your eyes. He is Hitler or Hitler-esque, and why aren't you doing something to stop Hitler? We saw this in the 1930s, and you're not doing anything. We got to be bolder. My position on that, but there are a lot of folks that believe that we're in really serious times in a semi-fascist state or fascist state. Agree or disagree?
Uh, are you asking if there are there people who believe that, or are you asking
Yeah,
me?
yeah, but I mean a significant
Yeah, there
minority.
are definitely people who believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably have some liberal college professor friends, aren't we? Have we abolished higher education yet?
Um,
That was a
in many
joke.
ways we have, but
Okay, yeah, that's a different subject, though. Okay, sorry not to give you time to speak. How far back do we need to go, Mr. History Professor? Do we need to go back to the founding of our country? Do we need to go to the 1619 Project? Do we need to go to the 1964 Civil Rights Act? Do we need to go to Johnson's executive order? How about the U.S. Supreme Court in 2023 outlining affirmative action? Where's a good place to set the tone, since this is a history show? Where's the good place to set the tone on current discussions about DEI? Your choice. You can go wherever you
but
want.
that's good. That's I can take it from anywhere because if you want me to walk it all the way back, the not to say that uh, Thomas Jefferson was a proto, fascist or something. But from the time of the founding, there were people who disapproved of the idea of ordered liberty, and we're arguing against the Enlightenment ideals of the Constitution in order to protect slavery, and it led to this like distortion and legal tradition and historical tradition that was anti-Enlightenment and embracing um, uh, critics of the Enlightenment. Um, for the most part, it was something that I mean, I guess there are two main forces for it: populism everywhere, and then pro-slavery, mostly in the South. and from the South, you got a sort of pro-slavery and populism in the South, and then the West tended to be pretty populist as well. And in every one of these traditions, it was we're not talking about fascism, but it was definitely reward friends, punish enemies,
Mm.
and I don't care about the law. Let's not give it too fancy of a name by calling it an ism. It's just sort of how people are if they're not taught to value the ideals of the founding. This is how children are if you don't raise them, like so the
That's a
big
good point. I
boost.
don't. Is there? Have you read recent articles on that? That's a good nuance that I haven't really thought about.
I mean, not recent articles, but it's a pretty well, this is stuff that people have been talking about uh,
This is what history
for
professors
200
talk about.
years, the big, obviously there were some big pushes in this regard, scientific racism, Darwinism, progressivism in the 19th century, all of these things kind of culminating in Woodrow Wilson, and getting through a sort of the split in the Republican Party. This guy becomes president, and then because of World War I, has wartime powers to actually enact this stuff. Um, but it kind of goes away after Wilson, and then the crisis of the sort of double crisis of the Depression and World War II brings it back. Tomorrow morning I'm going to be doing a webinar on the Grapes of Wrath, and one of the things I wanted everybody to read was FDR's inaugural address, where FDR's first inaugural address, he says some of the stuff that we get upset about Trump saying, I'm going to set aside the law and this, I'm going to do, there might be some times, but at least he says, he sort of says, I cherish the Constitution and our laws, but we might have to set them aside. And of course, the Democratic Party at that time was a big coalition, including many racists, progressives, Southerners, populists. So anytime you have a wartime emergency like that, a lot of structural changes can take place. Eisenhower moderates, corrects, redirects. But Lyndon Johnson is the guy who wants to out FDR. Uh, you might say uh, the Johnson, Nixon, Carter trio uh, did some damage. And it was also probably attributable to the fact that baby boomers were hitting college and able to vote for the first time in 72. Um, Maybe we see a kind of, and and it's not enough to simply um, uh, when we have people who take these extraordinary powers because of wartime or with a national emergency, it's really hard for the American system to undo during peacetime. And and real change means usually you have to control all three branches of government for a long time. And that's the way our founders designed it, and it's what has helped us from committing worse atrocities at most points of American history. But it also makes it really hard to fix problems if you don't have steady statesman-like leadership for a really long time. I mean, it took 40 or 50 years, depending on how you count, just to undo some of the damage to the judiciary that was done by Wilson and FDR. I mean, it takes a half century to undo some of that stuff. So, but most of the things that we see today are not really worthy of being called fascism. Uh, there, it's more like if a toddler's banging his spoon on his high chair, he's not a fascist. He's just somebody who doesn't know anything and has never been taught that you have to be polite and wait your turn, and you're not the only human being on earth, right?
Well, so Professor, on that point, I can't tell if we disagree or not. It seems to me that President Trump has been very strategic and disciplined in his uh, chainsawing of DEI. Not all the other stuff, but of
No,
DEI. He seems like he really hates this thing.
no, he's not. I mean, he's not embracing, if he were, he would be consulting with the best legal minds on the subject and approaching this and doing it in a constitutional and legal way, going after the low-hanging fruit first. I mean, you think about how
That's
strategic Eisenhower was in undoing segregation, right? And how, the nonprofits would wait, like the NAACP would wait until you have the right makeup of the Supreme Court, and then you have the right case that's so that the right justices who can do the right opinion so that you can undo this, like none of that is happening. They're doing keyword searches and banning stuff. Like this
so.
is
So when they ban the Enola Gay photo from the government archives, and admittedly they won't do that, but they initially highlighted it, going, "Get rid of the Enola Gay photo."
yeah,
Really?
so I mean, they're uncovering a combination of real outrages.
Yeah.
I mean, the climate justice thing, that was $20 billion. That's real. I mean, I, we're the biggest critics of Trump that you could ever find, but just handing $20 billion over to your political supporters so that they could all have jobs and do nothing is like, I mean, that's a scandal, Uh, and the fact that in this thing that will confuse, transgender mice will also capture, oh, by the way, yeah, there was actual waste, fraud, abuse, and in many ways legal waste, fraud, and abuse.
Right.
That's the because you can't say it wasn't legal because it was passed in a law, but I think most Americans would see that as just out and out fraud once you looked at it.
Okay, Bart wants to interrupt me
Now,
to help guide me. Bart.
I'm just waving my hand because I found out something yesterday about the so-called transgender mice.
That was the
Uh,
example I was thinking of. Yeah, go ahead and say
yeah,
that.
but apparently that's not a real issue.
Yeah.
Apparently, what they were doing was they were transplanting the, it wasn't even gender, they were transplanting genetic information from other species
Humans.
into a group of mice. And there's another, it's not transgender, it's
Transgenic.
something.
Transgenic.
Transgenic, right. So that's kind of a false issue. That's been debunked.
Yes. Yeah.
But your point is well made. Yes, there is lots of fraud, waste, and abuse out there.
So
but that's not one of them, apparently.
right. That's my point is that John's saying this has been targeted and thoughtful. No, it hasn't. This is
Yeah. I hate getting just humiliated, but I think you're right. I forget that you do hire lawyers and think through it in the right way if you want to really make change. Yeah.
well, and just you're forgetting our two rules for Trump, which is like never underestimate how little he knows and never underestimate the chaos. Like we're human beings and we are like our brains are wired to seek patterns. So when we look at what he's doing, we look for patterns and we want there to be some sort of pattern. Like there isn't. You can't. Like think of it. I mean, I know this is going to sound insulting, but like think of it more like a toddler. When you're dangling something in front of a toddler, right? Like it's not fascism.
Okay. All right. So, Professor, I get your point. So let me take this more serious now in two ways. Well, this has all been serious, but in two ways. I'm 59 years old. I'll be 60 here, and no, I'll be 59 in June. The Edmund Pettus Bridge clubbing, or whatever you call that, was 60 years ago today. So a lot of this transformation has happened in my life. So I remember the chaos of the early 70s and the end of the Vietnam War and the drugs and hippies. And it was a difficult time in our family. My oldest brother got kicked out of the home at like age 16, drugs and rebelliousness. It was a weird time. 80s were great, but 60s and 70s were kind of tumultuous. And so I remember when both blacks and Jews couldn't join country clubs in Denver in my lifetime. So I know that racism and sexism and biases against religions and cultures is real. I've seen it. I've heard hundreds of dirty jokes in my life. I've heard hundreds of racist jokes in my life. With real people, and it's not some, and some are harmless racist jokes if there's such a thing, and some are really mean-spirited racist jokes. I hang around real people and you hear real stuff. You go to a bar, a dive bar somewhere, and nothing against dive bars, I like them, but you'll hear crass stuff, and it's kind of fun to hear crass stuff, I think. But anyway, I think this is a real issue, and I have some concern, and here's where I want you to start giving me some education if you're so inclined. I have some real concern about abolishing all diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's a mistake. I think there are real people that are real scared and real nervous and have real backgrounds that are being really prejudiced against, or don't have the opportunities for advancement of buying homes and having jobs or getting into college still to this day. I'm not sure I believe in systematic racism or systematic. I really don't. I don't believe in affirmative action. I mean, I'm pretty mainstream on this kind of stuff, but I do think people need a helping hand once in a while. And so can you, it was Johnson in his executive act that defined diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I thought that was interesting. No, it was actually Biden that did that in 2021 in his executive order that Trump overturned Johnson's and Biden's executive orders and everything else. You are not a fan of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that correct?
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of diversity. I'm a fan of equity.
Excellent.
And a fan of inclusion. What I'm
Okay,
not,
we're on the same page.
but what I am not a fan of is what is known as the combination of the factors as implemented as DEI or DEIA in California.
So why don't you take us through a little bit of that? And as a reminder,
Well, I would just say that like
you can't get
every
fired over this?
what's that?
Are you sure you can't get fired over this?
I
This
mean,
conversation?
not as of 2 weeks ago,
Oh, well, so
because
you're thankful for Trump's stuff then.
no, because what happened has nothing to do with Trump.
Oh, okay. What happened 2 weeks ago?
Well, 2 weeks ago, the state of California was forced to admit in court that they would not punish any of their employees for speech, conduct, or academic or intellectual pursuits.
Oh, and that was a separate lawsuit independent of Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. But can you outline that a little bit more? Because you and I have talked about it in the past,
Sure.
but
I'll give you the quick and dirty version of it. That every piece of this ideology that came together has I would say, good and reasonable origin. And so, first, after World War II, there were many places that were still colonial possessions, and we didn't like the fact that there were colonies still in the world of European countries, and there were people who used violence to overthrow their colonial overlords, and we don't necessarily condemn those people for using violence in order to have national self-determination and overturn colonialism. After the passage of the Civil Rights Law, it was clear that merely passing the law wasn't solving every problem, because there were aspects of the law where race had influenced laws and racism had influenced laws that needed to be rooted out. And I don't disagree with that. And when we began studying and using, the sort of second wave of social science to examine why people struggle in life, we found out that people sometimes face more than one challenge in life. It often wasn't just because you had experienced racism, but you might also experience racism and sexism, right? And that certainly is true. And that if we want things to get better, we should embrace a kind of solidarity and try to side with the person who needs help. Any of these things are both true and reasonable. But here's the problem with what happened legally after this happened academically. So in essence, the laws in some places, in places like California, followed a legal and a political and academic movement within higher education. And it came out, what I just described to you, that is all true and all reasonable, comes out like this. You must use violence.
Oh, wait, there's that's not written down somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, that you must advocate the use of violence. Yeah, it is.
It's not written down, not in a government document.
It's called post-colonialism as an ideology.
Okay. This is
Oh, it
new to
gets
me.
worse. If you have a problem with that one, you're going to really hate the rest of it.
Oh, that's
right?
why I'm learning something. Wow.
That we must rank oppressions, that you cannot dissent from this
Hold on.
rank.
Well, hold on. What do you mean
sorry.
rank oppressions? What's that mean?
So that because you have to always side with the oppressed over the oppressor, that what you need to do is you need to, this is what is often called intersectionality, right? That you need to take all of these oppressions and then create a hierarchy from top to bottom. And then whoever's at the bottom, that's what everyone has to do. So it's a race to radicalism in almost every case. And so whoever has the most radical position, everyone must agree and no one can disagree. Because
Okay, how do we know who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed?
Usually through a system of ranking. So you say, well, I mean, and I've been in meetings before where this happened, where you say, well, you're Black or you're Mexican, but you're a man. So we listen to the female Mexican over the male Mexican, and the Black person gets to win over the Mexican. But if the person is gay or identify, in other words, they'll literally do a kind of ranking. And the discussion that takes place has nothing to do with the merits of the case. It will only be who has the greater, who wins in the battle of intersectionality will decide the question, not anything having to do with the question itself. And in fact, it even explicitly said that you have to reject the idea of merit. I mean, this is in the policies. Like you must reject the idea of merit when in decision making. I can show you. I mean, like, I know that this sounds crazy. I can show you.
I don't get it.
I'll put it in the here. I'll just send you I'll send you guys.
Well, wait, you're not going to violate some school policy, are you?
No, this is on a public website. I mean,
Okay.
they're not ashamed. That's the other thing. Like, they're not ashamed of it. They're proud of this. So if you want to see,
So those are you can go ahead and post it, but you've listed two so far. You must use violence and you must rank oppressions. There were more, I think. You were going to keep going.
yeah, that everything must be seen through the lens of race, not just examine things for racism, but everything. And then to take
Hold
that
on. Let me interrupt you again.
Yeah.
So I have heard that in news articles or columns, or maybe it's my conservative friends, which I have a ton of, that say, "Hey, John, you're just not getting it," and that means nothing to me. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. Why would everything have to be seen through the view of race? Why would you do that?
John, I'm telling you that if you are a groundskeeper at a community college in California 1 year ago, the policy, as it was stated by the academic senate and the chancellor's office, pointed to these definitions and policies, and this is ultimately what the court said you can't do, right? Said that if you were a groundskeeper, you had, in order to keep your job, you had to demonstrate how you were practicing anti-racism in your job. And anti-racism, by the way, and then the definition of anti-racism is not being against racism. Because let's not, the anti-racism was defined as you must engage in discrimination on the basis of race in order to be an anti-racist.
And that is some kind of version of affirmative action? Is that what they're looking for?
This is so far beyond affirmative action. Or
I don't get it yet. Keep explaining then. I don't get it. What do you mean?
Well, we've got a hand here from Rick.
Yeah, I just want to. I have worked for an organization. Professor Tootle is not the only one who's worked for an organization that has actively followed those policies. And you don't have to look very far in Colorado. Just look at how the City Council of Denver operates. It is very much along these lines at times. So I've seen it, I've lived it, and I know it's real, and it's has nothing at all to do with the merits of whatever business or policy or other organization that means of thinking and making decision trumps everything else. Pun intended.
So thank you, Rick, for your add-on endorsing what's happening in the real world. Professor Tootle.
We got one of Susan's phone is.
She wants to talk to you. All right, go ahead, Susan.
Having worked for the city and county of Denver for 7 years, from 2020, from 2020 until I retired in December of 21, everything had to be looked at through the lens, was the phrase, of DEI. And the way DEI was carried out in Denver was not the lists that you're recently seeing on Facebook. It was basically hire as many Black people as you can and adjust the qualifications as necessary.
Well, wait, that's in writing or that's cultural?
Oh, no, that was just in practice.
Okay.
It was, it was in meetings. It was in I can't swear that in minutes of meetings it's written down anywhere, but trust me, I was in those meetings.
Okay. Professor, thanks for your endorsement, Susan. Professor, because this is still alien to me. Professor, I served in county government. I was an elected official. We had some kind of this in the 90s. I was in the Army. We did trainings in this. I found them to be mostly, actually, I kind of thought they were nice. There were some nice points. There were some weird points. There were some points you disregard. There was things we laughed at in private afterwards, but it didn't harm our day or the training and the mission. I dealt with businesses, for all sorts of businesses, for 10 years as the CEO of a chamber, and I ran into this already. I founded the diversity committee within the chamber. I really want diversity, and we had minorities that wanted to have a club within the chamber. I love that. I went to all the meetings. I thought it was great. So when did this?
Nothing I'm saying is disagreeing with any of that.
So when did this change, though? I feel like an old man who's missed out in some generational thing. When did it get really bad? Is it just 20 years, 15 years ago?
Yeah. Yes, it was really in the wake of, I would say the ideals were promoted within the Obama administration, but then, the sort of theoretical parts of it. But this is all stuff that had been coming together since the the first of these principles that I just enunciated, probably postmodernism. That comes out of the European intellectual tradition that says we need to be skeptical of grand theories because they needed to find a way to just, to deal with the fact that they had embraced both Nazism and communism, right? And so I'd say, you Europeans need to be a little more skeptical of grand theories because you embrace Nazism and communism. But You know, there's another way of doing it. I would say Calvinism works just fine, or Judaism would be would both be good tools for, you know, not embracing grand theories. But then it went from being you must um, you must be skeptical of someone who has truth claims, like a Nazi or a communist, and becomes there is no such thing as truth, and all that matters is power. Right. So it's not the original argument. The original argument is perfectly valid. Be skeptical of Nazis, right? Yeah, okay, I'm on board with that. But when you get to the part where you say, no, we need to go further than that and say there's no such thing as truth, and the only thing that matters is power, and then you add to that the person who must have power is the person who's oppressed, and then you add to that the person that we need to rank the oppressed, and then you add to that you can't disagree, and you add to that you must see every aspect of life through this lens. That becomes a toxic and illegal stew that is unconstitutional and butts up against the American legal tradition.
So you don't like the way Trump's doing it because it's a chaotic mess without a rhyme or reason.
I would
But
even I would even be skeptical that he's doing it.
right,
You know,
fine.
like,
But the answer is you think this is a nice isn't the right word, but you think this is a good corrective change over the last 15 years, and it needed to be done in some manner.
well, the real corrective is necessary. But here's the problem, because people think that the corrective for what's happening in California is the Florida Stop Woke Act. Now, that's not true either. You know, I'm with I'm with FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, who filed lawsuits against both Florida and California, because the solution to this is not doing the opposite. The solution is doing what our Declaration of Independence and Constitution actually call for, which is something that results in actual diversity, actual equity, actual inclusion. You know, as Calvin Coolidge says, we don't need any new ideas. These work. There is no advance. There is no proposition that is progress beyond the principles of the Declaration. Anyone
Okay,
who wishes
so
to
you're doing
deny
a
their
nice.
truth or their soundness, the only direction they're going is backwards.
Okay, Professor, you've done a nice job outlining this, and so I kind of want to get to Q&A here in just a second. Um, I've done this with you a variety of times, and you almost always slam me down on it. At some point, I might actually get a point or two.
Okay.
If any of my black friends, any of them, well, now I've got some really conservative black friends though too, so that's not true. But most of my black friends, if they were listening to this conversation, they would actually have some pretty voracious disappointment that I've got a bunch of white people sitting around talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You and I have talked about that before. Do you give them? Do you have empathy for where we are in the country, or do you think this is? Do they would well, some of them would just say this is a plain racist conversation. I mean, they're probably the systematic racism, and I can't believe you guys are even talking about this unless you're defending us. Shut up. You know, I have some pretty aggressive friends. Can you give any reaction to that, where we are as a country, and how we should engage as humans?
I think that the thing that I've done that has been most effective is I used to keep that webpage that I posted from the Academic Senate. I used to just keep it like open on my phone, you know, and I would pull one of the recommended activities from the practice. I mean, I would encourage everybody, click around in there, and understand that that's what we were being ordered to do. And being told that if you don't do this, you're going to be fired. You're not going to get hired. And if you say you won't do this stuff, you're not going to be hired. Part of the hiring process was you have to promise you're going to do this stuff. And if you don't promise it, no job, right? And then you realize, do I really want instead of teaching chemistry, you know, like if you look at what they were promoting that should have been included in every class, you would just say like, well, would we have any time to ever teach chemistry? Because you've just outlined 14 anti-racist activities that I have to do in a 16-week semester. And I'm not going to have time to go over the periodic chart if I'm required to teach race consciousness every week with a different activity. And the more that I do, the better I am. And what you will typically get is disbelief. I mean, for the most part, people will say like, what you're saying sounds so outlandish. That can't possibly be true. And that's why I have to show them. And I just say, pick a week, look at those things, pick a week and look at what they were saying. This is what the state wants you to do in your classroom on week 4. No matter what subject you're teaching.
I want to emphasize this again. You're saying I really, truly am just out of the loop. When I enlisted in the Army, went down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina in 1991, served 12 years. That was up to 2003. We had a variety of diversity, equity, inclusion. I don't think we called it that then, but we had a variety of courses on diversity and racism and stuff. And again, I thought they were not harmless. I actually thought for the most part, they were generally kind of helpful. I'm from Colorado, the suburbs of Colorado. We didn't have a lot of blacks in the suburb. We still don't. And so I thought it was really neat to be serving with a bunch of blacks and understand they might have a different perspective and a different culture and how to deal with each other better. I really didn't think it took us away from the mission of the Army. But now Hegsteth is ordering everything is gone. No diversity, equity, and because it's taking us away. We should be killers and breaking things. That's what we do in the Army, and that's the only thing we can do. And I look at it and go, I don't know. That seems a little dramatic, too far. But you're saying no, we should actually do that. Your periodic table and the chemistry thing. Army people should be fighting wars, and chemistry teachers should be teaching chemistry. We don't need to do any of this.
Well, I would just say there's a part of war fighting that the Trump administration is, not understanding, but that there was an actual problem. So here's my example. In World War II, the US Army realized that a lot of our soldiers couldn't read. Couldn't read very well. So they started making, instruction booklets as comic books. And you could say on one hand, well, aren't you engaging in, social engineering, and that the Army shouldn't be a vehicle for social engineering? Well, yeah, but if you have to teach people about basic hygiene, you also need to teach people, what makes it easier to teach people about what keeps their feet dry is being able to read. And if you're fighting in the Pacific, I mean, and these things now look racist in retrospect, but the military was putting out comic books about like how to tell a Japanese person from someone from the Philippines and from someone from China, because the Filipinos and the Chinese, good, they're our allies. Japanese, kill them, right? So there is always going to be an educational component to the military, because even though our focus should always be on, war fighting, killing, which is what the military is ultimately for, almost, most of the military doesn't engage in that kind of activity. Even in World War II, the vast majority of soldiers, I'm sure Jake can look this up really quickly, like, how many soldiers in World War II ever fired a weapon? And the number will shock you. It's actually very small, because how you actually win wars is through logistics, which sounds boring, but it's rock, paper, scissors. When your enemy can show up on the battlefield with a rock, you need to get paper there, right? That's how you win battles. So somebody who says we don't need to teach diversity, I would just say, like, well, you're also, again, this is the defensible part. If one of the strengths of the American military is that we you get to use the brains and talents of every person in the American family. And we don't tie one hand behind our back and say, nope, women, you don't get to contribute. And we don't tie 10% of our hands behind our backs and say, nope, not you, Black people, or 20% of, and say, nope, not you, Hispanics. Like, no, I mean, that's what makes our military strong. So making sure that people in the military understand that diversity is part of what makes us the military function better. And if you need to teach that to somebody, by all means, teach it. That is not, but that is not what DEI is doing.
You just think we've totally, the last 10 or 15 years, we've just gone totally off the deep end in madness.
Yeah. Bart wants to chime in, so let's see. Bart.
All right.
Yeah, I just have a quick thing I want to try and chime in is I think, Stephen, I think all of your points are really good that you're making on this. I think one thing, though, from a historical perspective that I guess you would have to acknowledge is that throughout World War II, the U.S. military was completely and totally segregated. Yes. By like nationality, race, everything. And that's kind of a weird, I don't know, it's just a weird feature.
Well, I would just remind you, like, it was Wilson who segregated the military.
Oh, yeah, no, and I'm not being partisan about it.
Yeah,
I'm just kind of
one of the things is
out
when you get racist and progressives with the power, like, and he considered himself a Southerner. So one of the things he did was he weakened the military by segregating it. And every step to undo that makes the military stronger. And I guess this brings up my next point with, when it comes to like, people say, well, why would you have a problem, teaching about racism? I say, like, what do you think I do every day? I teach my students every day about how the role of race and racism influenced American history. I mean, in the whole story. My problem is not with teaching people what happened. The problem becomes when you tell me, no, that's fine, you need to do that. But what you really need to do is you need to, and you will be evaluated on instilling race consciousness in your students. And your performance will be measured if you get people to actually think of themselves primarily by race. So that if a student comes into my classroom and says, my primary identity is an evangelical Christian, I say, no, you're Mexican. You need to think of yourself as a Mexican first. And then somebody says, well, how about this? Like, I think of myself as being gay. You say, no, you're white. That somehow, like, and the idea that this could be translated into something that would be measured and evaluated as part of hiring, promotion, tenure, again, not just for faculty, for everyone. Like, it's completely over the top bonkers.
Yeah. So all that's new to me, Professor. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. Do you think most people that are in big corporate or big organizational America have had experiences similar to you, Rick, and Susan?
Well, I think the difference is in the corporate world, it's often perfunctory.
Yeah.
It meaning that we need to pretend to do this because it's what we need to be able to have a press release. So everybody gets together and says, oh, we're going to do this thing. And they're like, okay. And so that they can pretend to be on the right side.
And then they go back to driving their forklift.
The dangerous thing is that where I work is that people mean it.
Yeah.
They want to actually do it, not just pretend to.
Okay.
Sorry, Rick, let's ask Rick.
I worked in large corporate organizations that I thought did it right, in that they really emphasized the need to accommodate for all differences to the fullest extent, up to not compromising the business. Yep. And I think that when you get into a situation that Professor Tootle is describing, where it's compromising the ability to pursue academics, you've gone too far. And I think most businesses, if they go too far, they go out of business. And so some completely ignore the opportunities that exist for embracing inclusion and diversity and equity, but some of them really get it right. And I think the ones that get it right are often very successful. But going too far, and when you start mandating it in a fashion that Professor Tootle describes it, I've worked with a nonprofit that did just that. It's very uncomfortable, and you lose sight of your mission very carefully, quickly. One last thing, one of the things that really resonated with me is when John Bolton was describing Trump, and he said, any thought at all that he has strategy or policy, just forget it. And I think what Professor Tootle is saying in DEI, there is no, in my view, there is no Trump strategy or policy around what he's doing. He's just breaking things like a toddler does because he doesn't like it. So I'm going to stop
And I
talking.
think there's even, not only do I agree with you, I think that there's a bizarre irony, which is that Trump, the closest thing to an ideology you could say Trump has is he's a critical theorist. You
Hey,
know, in other
you
words,
said that last week, Professor, and I guess I don't understand critical race theory. Will you flush that out a little bit?
well, a critical theorist, a critical theory is the idea that you use sort of lenses in order to view things, and that everything needs to be viewed through one lens.
Well,
And
give an example of what you think I might use a lens on looking at something. I don't get it.
let's say, I mean, if you're a Marxist, for instance, that
Well, no,
you,
I'm not a capitalist anymore because of you, but I'm a peaceful exchange of goods and services and ideas. So whatever that is.
well,
I'm
the
an American.
problem with you, I mean, the problem with you, John, is that you embrace the founding. You're a pluralist. So a pluralism is a rejection of critical theory because,
Okay, that actually might make some sense to me.
yeah, that if you are a critical theorist, the first thing is that you say we need to view everything through the lens of X. And then what follows from that is to then argue for a monocausal explanation of everything. So say, you know, and the one that you might be most familiar with would be Marxism, who said, you know, like you say, like everything must be viewed through the lens of economics, right? And that anything that is non-economic
Okay.
is essentially fake.
Well, would a Christian nationalist then be the
Yeah,
same?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, that
So
makes
you
sense.
everything must be viewed through the lens of the literal interpretation of the Bible out of context. I mean,
Okay.
but that's the closest way I've ever found to understanding Trump, which is that essentially Trump has turned many people into critical theorists, which is why I say, like, from a governing standpoint, there is no difference between the Trump and Biden or Trump and Obama. They're the same. Maybe not Obama, but but certainly many of the supporters of these guys, like, because they are all embracing a monocausal explanation. They just have a different one. And if you want to, this is how we can also make sense of it. The other appeal of it is it's comforting in a time of chaos. All I need to know is what is Trump saying today, and then I'll know what to do. Right? That's the critical theory framework that will get you through the next 4 years. Like, I don't have to think. And just like saying, well, let's look at housing policies in Cleveland in the 1970s. And you say, well, let's look at how race and racism influenced housing policies in Cleveland in the 1970s. But then when somebody points out, oh, but there's also a river that goes right here, you say, no, it's only racism. And you're like, well, can't we factor in the river? No. Like, you reject any complication that goes against the monocausal explanation. That's
Okay, let me ask a follow-up on that because I think there's you'll correct me again as you've done 3 times so far. So my parents moved to the home just a block away from where I live, where you visited me, in 1966 when I was born, because I was the 5th child. So they 7 of them. They needed a 1,400 square foot mansion to raise 7 people or 5 kids. there's no doubt that there's a ton of folks that moved around the suburbs of Denver and every other city in America because of Brown versus Board of Education. I never thought it was because my parents were racist or they didn't want the kids be bused across into North Denver or North Denver kids bused into South Denver. But they lived in Denver and they moved out of Denver. So there's some component that they didn't want that to happen. And they and hundreds of thousands of other people in America moved to the suburbs. Isn't that a fact?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if they were racist or not, but I think it's a fact. You're saying that under critical race theory, that's the only thing that we consider is that.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
okay? That's helping me. Mayor Tower, you are the mayor of the third largest city in America, and not America, in Colorado. You have no obligation to ask a question or make a comment, especially since you signed in late. But this is Q&A time, and I always try to give newcomers a first shot at the apple. You don't have to take yourself off video either, but I do see you're off mute. Do you have a question of Professor Tootle?
Well, first of all,
Nice to
just
see you,
because
Mayor.
just because I didn't hear anything doesn't mean I can't have an opinion, right?
You are still a politician. Nice to see you, Mayor.
Good to see you too. No, I was just listening to the Q&A, and uh, one of the things that I think is a little bit undersold is um, there's been a lot of articles. You know, there's a difference between reading an article about research and actually doing the research and knowing what it means. But there've been several articles that have caught my eye in the last month or so
And
that
by the way,
argue.
the professor used to live in Colorado, so he's familiar with Aurora. But you're one of the most diverse cities in America, aren't you? Isn't Aurora really diverse?
Uh, yes, although it depends on what you mean by diverse. Usually when they say that, it's because our diversity is a close match to what the makeup of America is.
Good point.
So for example, we're not
Yeah,
the most black city in the country. We're not the most white city in the
yeah.
country, not the most Hispanic. But if you look at our blend, it's a pretty good mixing pot.
And sorry to interrupt you with that, but that's a nice note to know. Go, please
No,
continue.
and what's interesting is we actually have very segregated neighborhoods, but they're not segregated by race. They end up occasionally being segregated by race, but what they're really segregated by is income. And going to your point about looking at things through one lens, I used to be the mayor of Aurora, and I have a Pakistani across the street on one side, an Iraqi across the street next to him, the lesbian couple with a son next to them. I have the Black widow next to me on one side, the guy who's married to an actual Korean, not a person of Korean descent, an actual Korean. Um, the hardest thing to find in my neighborhood is white people, but they all have about the same education. And so it's just interesting to me. Sometimes we can assemble, but not necessarily by race, but by other things that we have in common. Like the guy down at the end of the block, he's Indian, uh, but he teaches at the University of Colorado Medical School. So when we talk about like I forget the word you use, but the people you're only using one lens. My experience is that no matter which single lens you use, it doesn't really match the real world. And if you try and organize your company by a single lens, it's not going to work.
Right. And it's contrary to the founding. What you're describing is Hamilton's America, because as Hamilton and Madison described, protecting equality of opportunity will always result in inequality of condition because people want different things in life. And that's not something to be feared. It's something to be embraced. And that's the value of, I would say, real diversity, right? Real diversity means that we get to use, and this is what Hamilton was arguing, real diversity means that we get to have a country where everybody gets to participate in the way that they want to. You're protecting the rights of conscience, the right of you to live, to order your own values for yourself. And then what that will always result in, and this is what Madison explained, is that will always result in inequality of condition. because people want different things in life. And this will be a net benefit. And then the value of real equity, not what's described in DEI, but the value of real equity is that you are doing everything possible to level the playing field so that accomplishments can be real. You know, that people can make real advancements by proving that they deserve to be there. And so real equity will result in real diversity, and it will also result in real inclusion. And these are all things that the founders were for. But yeah, I'm sorry.
Professor, a lot of my conservative friends hate the word equity. They think it's socialism or Marxism. They think you have to use equality. That
You know
equity
what?
is the opposite of.
I can solve this so quickly, right? Quick Google search in this journal, an article written by the dean of the Harvard Law School that is entitled, that literally is on the issue of equity and equality in the American legal tradition. And I think that might even be the title of it. And, and it literally says, I mean, no matter what the state of California or your academic friends want to invent in the last 10 minutes, in the American law, the words equity and equality are exactly the same. There is no distinction between those things.
So you don't have that umbrage, obviously, about the word equity.
Well, I have again, it's like we live in this weird world where I have to say, well, what do you mean by it?
Yeah.
Because if you mean the proper definition of equity, which is equality, I have no problem at all. But
American exceptionalism properly defined.
Properly understood, yeah. Equity, properly understood. American exceptionalism, properly understood. But I don't know what you mean by this stuff.
Professor, real quickly, I have to get back to work. But I don't want you to think it's because I disagreed with what you just said.
Okay.
Mayor, you're always welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John. Talk to you soon.
You bet. Hope, you have no obligation to take yourself off video or mic, but I'm concerned you want to speak. So go ahead. My guess is you're pissed, and that's a legal term for being upset and angry.
I missed most of this. No, I
Yeah,
missed,
so do you have any-
unfortunately, most of it because the only thing I'm going to say, because I have two unique perspectives. One is that I was bused as a kid into, as a white kid into predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. And that was really good for me because I got to figure out I was put in the position of trying to fit in, right? As a white person, I was the minority. So that's a whole other concept. It's definitely shaped me. Secondarily, I should never have gotten into the private high school I got into, and I got in because my mother taught there. I was a faculty brat, but having gone to public schools my whole life, I know I did terribly on the entrance exam. I had very good grades, but here's my point. So we were middle class. So it was definitely, I was never going to go to that private high school financially, had my mom not worked there. We couldn't afford it. We made too much money for financial aid and not enough to afford it. And I was not prepared at all academically, at all. However, I wound up rising to the challenge with no skills compared to my classmates who were boarding school kids from day one. And I mean, in a way, it was DEI, right? But it was because I was a faculty brat. So I was a beneficiary. So I'm so sorry. I've been on medical calls all morning. I jumped on this as quickly
So you
as
were
I
a
could.
legacy appointment because of your mom.
Pretty much. And it really benefited my life. It changed my life unbelievably. So while I do not want unqualified, unmotivated kids to be entered into college, and I have two white males, so believe me, they got screwed in the college world. And, COVID entered that too. But I see why somebody not as prepared and maybe who can't afford it also can really benefit. So I'm very mixed about the whole subject.
Fascinating. I would have
I
guessed
am a DEI person in that I am pro LGBTQ plus. I'm pro people of color, pro women, pro people with, disabilities. So I'm not shopping at Target anymore because I do think that there's a place for it. Because I also have a Black woman friend who's my age at UCLA and has been passed over countless times for, raises and advancement in her career, while a young, white, inexperienced male is getting more money and being, promoted. And she's got a PhD. I don't even think he has a master's degree. So that still happens. And I don't know if DEI would protect her, but that was my idea of it, that you can't do that. You have to, especially in a public university, you have to hire the more qualified person, no matter their gender or their, blah, blah, blah. So that's my 2 cents.
Cool. Thank you for your 2 cents. Professor, do you have a reaction to anything from Hope that's
Well,
out?
I guess I reminded something I sometimes tell my students, which is like dumb rich kids are taking that spot and they're incredibly lazy, and you should just go and take it from them. You're smart and you're hardworking, and why do you feel like they should have that spot when you could just go take it? uh, a little dumb rich kids with parents. I mean, parents always try to seek advantages for their kids. That's just
Right.
the case. So it's one of those things you can't really legislate uh, out of parents, because parents love their kids, right?
Right.
And it's not even a bad thing. But at the same time, poor people are under no obligation to not compete against your dumb, lazy kid. I'm not saying your kids are dumb and lazy, but like under, like poor, smart, hardworking kids like this. The other part of Hamilton's dream is like, no, they go take it from you because they want it more. And I want to see more of Hamilton's vision. I sometimes tell my students when the story about Hamilton, which I know Stephen Knott relayed on this podcast a while back, where the traveler sees the monument to Jefferson and he says, "Where's the monument to Hamilton?" He says, "If you want to see the monument to Hamilton, look around you." And
Right.
that always hits my students in a good way. Like, we are the monument to Hamilton, or we wouldn't be here right now.
Lovely. I don't remember that quote from Professor Knott. That's nice. We are almost out of time, or we could have another 5 or 10 minutes, I think, unless you have to run. Thanks for that, Hope. Rick or Susan or Sandon or Bart, you want to jump in with questions or comments for the professor before we leave?
Well, I'm actually interested in talking to Bart, if that's
Please.
okay. I just was wondering if Bart had had a chance to. I sent you that article that included the court decision, and I wanted to make sure that you're reading it the same way that I read it and that Fire read it. So I was just wondering what your take was on the.
And you should exchange at least $1 so he can be your attorney.
Oh,
So
right,
go
yeah. This is are you going to charge me in 15-minute increments here?
No. This is totally on the house, because you and I have
Okay.
been talking about this for about a year, actually. No, I was really glad to see that case get resolved that way. I don't know. I mean, the ideal thing would have been for.
But summarize the part, though. You got to put a legal summary because we don't know what you're talking about.
Yes. Okay. Here, let me give you the legal summary. An organization that Stephen and I know about, it's called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. They filed a lawsuit on behalf of several faculty members in the California junior college system. Do you guys still call it junior college, or is it community college?
Sure, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
They filed suit to stop the enforcement of that university system's diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements. And the way they resolved the lawsuit is that the university system said, okay, we're not going to take the rules away because we think they're important, but we're not going to enforce them anymore, which is a little weird, but we lawyers do that kind of thing all the time. A lot of times you just need to resolve a case. And I think it's great because with the stuff Stephen described to me that goes on out there, he was very accurately early in our conversation here describing how those policies were being implemented. And when you think about I don't want to use the word oppression because it has all these weird connotations these days, but they were basically making faculty members swear that they were going to, I don't know, be equity and inclusion masters or something. And it was ridiculous.
You had to write a statement in order to get, you had to write it, and it had to be in the, I mean, we just had a job or a hiring last year in history, and it was like we had, I don't know if I ever showed you the job ad, but most of the job ad had nothing to do with history. It was all about like, here's what you must swear to do in your equity statement. And then the policy was it has to be a substantial part of the scoring process when hiring. And, so in other words, like, I mean, just imagine if we have these scoring metrics for job candidates, like, oh, well, he gets on a 0 to 5 scale, and he gets a 5 and a 5 and a 5. So, wow, this is an amazing candidate. And then he gets zeros in 2 categories. Well, there's no way that candidate's ever going to get a job. And so you could be disqualified from hiring if you said you were for equality.
Yeah, and the whole discussion you were having a couple minutes ago about, and Stephen, you described this perfectly accurately, and I didn't understand this until about a week ago when Jonah Goldberg was talking about it. But in our society, you were describing Trump as a critical theorist, kind of. Yeah. And I never heard that term before, but the reality, I mean, critical theory, when you boil it right down, is you reach a conclusion because that's the conclusion you want to reach. And then you take all of your evidence and you make it point to that conclusion, whether it actually gets there or not.
Right. You reason from your conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're doing so much of that in our society today that it's really very detrimental to us.
Yeah, and it's because it's also the way information is presented to us. It also makes it much more for instance, I had a friend last week who reposted Russian propaganda. And the Russian propaganda was something that included 2 things that if you were to fact check them independently would both fact check is accurate. But the most effective way to engage in propaganda is to reason from a premise. You say, Russia's good, Europe bad, right? Now I'm going to go find 2 pieces of information that are both, if fact-checked, accurate, put them there, manipulate the headline, and then post the meme, right? And that's also the way even our schools have been teaching this since, basically since Google has been invented. And in my household, we always joke that we call it Google me right, which is that if you just have a premise and say, go find me something that proves that I'm right, then you claim, oh, I've done the research. And this is another quote from Calvin Coolidge, Business and the Free Press. The most effective propaganda is something that tries to force a conclusion that a candid survey of all the facts would not result in. So you say, I'm just going to tell you little pieces of the truth in a narrative that leads you to a lie. And that's the most effective propaganda.
Fascinating. Okay, we are almost out of time. Susan or Sandon, now's your time to ask a question or a comment, or we got to hang up. No one?
I wanted to give, I'll always ask a comment. Professor Tootle, when you were saying like what Hamilton and Madison were after, which in my gut, I agree, but I don't have enough on board to reason through it, but I could feel it. Like allowing people to find their place. What is a system like that? Is there a single word ism kind of word for that kind of system? Because it seems to me that was a massive genius in those people, not even how they work together, but just the people themselves having something like that.
Well, sometimes we use the word pluralism, but that doesn't capture all of it. So, I mean, sometimes people say like Republican pluralism, but I mean, to how about John? You're going to love this. If you want to summarize that belief system in one word,
I got it.
America.
Oh, okay. I was going to say peace, but
Like,
America.
you know, what Americanism is what it is.
That's why it was an innovation.
Yeah, I mean it's what Lincoln called the apple of gold. The application of the principles of the Declaration in the body of the Constitution. That that what we're going to do is we are going to be committed to both the ideals, which, as Coolidge says, I mean, Coolidge was such a good explainer of the founding, you know, that ideals are things that only exist in our own minds. They're in some way they're spiritual, you know. And I explained it to my class this way. We can all recognize that like a line is the shortest distance between 2 points, but a point doesn't exist. But because this ideal of a point exists, then we can create a line, and then we can build buildings. And we all live in these buildings, so we know that this theory works. And what our founders were saying was we think that human beings we're not going to say human beings are angels. We're not going to say human beings are good. We're not going to say human beings are bad. What we're going to say is human beings are capable of governing themselves. And they can do it. Human beings are actually capable of peacefully governing themselves. And and how you do that is through having these ideals and then dedicating yourself to the ideals and how they're implemented. And that's what, you know, Lincoln worked so hard to try to explain, and that I feel like Coolidge also did a good job at this too.
Excellent.
If I can I just follow up on that real quick, John? So there's the economic concept of comparative advantage. Like, you're good at catching fish, you're good at catching squirrels, you get comparative advantage. Do you know if Madison, Hamilton, Lincoln, did they see things in that kind of economics lens?
Well,
In my
they would have said, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
But they would have said that this is all going to come about because of protecting the many rights you already have, that this will have the advantage in the real world. And so, I mean, if you think about somebody like Hamilton, just like Hope mentioned, you know, our experiences when we grow up, you know, shape us. And if you're somebody who's smart and hardworking and better than everybody else, and the thing that's holding you back is the fact that your parents aren't married and you're from nowhere, you know, that you want to create a society so that people who are smart and hardworking want to get want to get ahead and should be allowed to. And so, you know, maybe we don't think that Hamilton's like, you know, a genius for coming up with this. It's the oppression he had felt. But as Hope just put in the comments, I do feel like I need to address this. It's not called Darwinism. You know, Darwin, and well, subject for another show. But
Go ahead and take 30 seconds.
Darwin was a complicated figure. And
I was being facetious. I'm so
okay.
sorry.
Yeah, because it's not every man for himself, and it's not whoever has the power can crush the weak. That is absolutely not what the founders were advocating. The founders really did believe in, and I know this is hard for people to believe because of things like slavery, you know, sexism, Native American treatment, and stuff like that. But they really did believe that they were creating a government that was going to be based on equality, that would be advancing equality. They did. They were sincere about that.
Fully agree. Fully agree. Coming from what they were coming from, fully agree.
Excellent. We are out of time, but last call for a 15-second something. Anyone? Okay, Professor, what did you think? Just take 30 seconds or a minute to summarize Did I ask the questions you thought I was going to ask about DEI? Did
Well, I
yours?
thought we were going to lean on Bart a little bit more because I wanted to get into, because I mean, I guess the only thing that we didn't really get into is like it was interesting to me that the case in California was dismissed because of standing, and essentially the plaintiffs had not suffered the harm yet. And then which is, you know, true in that I mean standing can go either way, so I don't, it's not a hill I want to die on, but I and I'm sure my own prejudice would have, you know, informed a more generous definition of standing. But you know, trying to set aside my own prejudice and say, yes, right, this was a potential harm, not yet a harm that had been inflicted. But it is just gobsmackingly stunning that that when, I mean, it really felt to me like how the Trump lawyers, when they were trying to overturn the election, kind of how what they had to do when they got into court, which is like disavow everything they had said. You know, like the lawyers for California just sort of got into court and said, I don't know how you could have ever got the impression that this would have been a requirement. None of these people will ever be sanctioned. No one will ever be punished. We won't do anything about academic freedom. Like, and they just disavowed every single part of it and said these were mere suggestions. There is one thing, and the link that I posted, I did find interesting because I looked at this stuff a couple days ago because I was talking about it with one of my colleagues, and I did note that the link that used to go between the chancellor's office and the academic senate is now dead. Because before, the chancellor's office would point to these guidelines and say, this is what you're supposed to do. And when I clicked on it last week, it says website not found.
That's great. Now, I think, you know, Stephen, yeah, I appreciate your reaction to that case. I think what you have to understand about lawsuits is that they very rarely make anyone happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is just the result that, you know, the state, I think, had to make the best arguments they could. And they were really, really bad arguments.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You know, the only one that they had was standing, but standing is one of those elastic kind of things. It's like, you know, if it would be better for us not to decide this case, we're gonna conclude that these people don't have legal standing to be doing the lawsuit.
Yeah.
You know, that's an easy cop out for a court.
Yeah. So in a way, and I think I could say this without revealing any confidences, but like there are administrators throughout the state who I think are now feeling like they've been hung out to dry because it means that all of the legal liability now rests with the district. So that if they actually implement stuff and then someone suffers a harm, then they can still get sued.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be a problem. You know, and I think they're probably not going to enforce it. That's really what it comes down to.
And it's weird because John's first question, sorry if I love talking to Bart. Bart, it's really interesting because one of the things that I think administrators throughout the state are now struggling with is they're getting one set of instructions from the Trump administration, you know, and they're getting another set of instructions from the state, and they just had this court ruling, and they're trying to come up with some way of, you know, squaring this triangle or rounding this triangle into a coherent set of policies. And my advice for them is just go neutral, you know, like just stick with what the Constitution says, go with equality, opportunity, and you'll be fine. But
it is the best way to go. You know, I mean, I think I'm kind of with John on well, I don't know. I don't want to speak in favor of DEI or against it or anything, but the reality is we do have to teach people about the very obvious racial and ethnic discrimination that has occurred in this country. Because if we don't teach people about that, my God, they're going to be ignorant.
Well, and that's the point, again, I keep quoting Coolidge here, but, something that I always liked is that truth and freedom are inseparable. That I can't tell you the truth about what America is without telling you the whole story. And that whole story does include racism and sexism and discrimination and all of that stuff. So I would say that's, and again, I'm quoting Coolidge again, but like, that's why we're supposed to say the defense is supposed to be the truth. Like, if what I'm saying is true, then I should be able to teach it. And that includes the truth of the horrors, but also the truth of what was going on in the rest of the world at the time. That if I were to teach you that slavery was invented by the United States, or I was to imply that, that would be a lie. So, teaching that this is the system that ended slavery, that's the truth. It's the exchange of beliefs between Britain and the United States and the advancements of those legal arguments in those two countries primarily that lead to the end of slavery.
Right.
You have helped me so much when you said that. I think you said that before, and you've helped me so much because, this is exactly what I teach. And it's always been really prickly. I don't ever want to mention, by the way, Africans sold Africans because I don't want to be annihilated. But the way that you say it is perfect. We did not invent it. It was very, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cultures way back, did it. So thank you. And we're the ones who ended it, at least most forms of it. So thank you for that.
Well, but we also need to acknowledge in a weird way that there are more slaves in the world today, but usually it's human beings that are being trafficked. So, in all of these things, like, that's why, getting back to a point made earlier that, like, the easiest way to tell lies by telling a partial truth, that it's very easy to manipulate people by blowing something out of proportion or minimizing, and that's why in the field of academics and ideas, I generally cut people a wide swath, and say that I want a lot of freedom when it comes to expressing ideas, because we're going to make well-intentioned mistakes while engaging in this truth-seeking. That's also why I object so much to the idea that the government, I always say, be careful what you wish for. I'm like, do you really want your argument to be that we have to teach what the government tells us? Is that really your position? Because I can at least see some scenario where that comes back to bite you.
Well, what state was it that said we have to be okay with prayer in school? And then, like, the Satanists were like, okay, well, if we have to be open to prayer in school, then we want to be praying to this. I love that.
The Satanists have been very active every time in, it's just become almost, it was initially a joke and it still is a joke, but like that, they'll go and build a monument to, Cthulhu.
Well, I don't want to end on Satan.
I like my earlier thing.
Does anybody have kids that have not gone to college or still about to apply or gonna apply? Because if you have time, I have one more very interesting factoid to lay on.
We're way over.
Okay, never mind. We can do it later. We can do it another time.
That's a teaser for the next show.
Okay. We do have to end. We're just way over. Professor, thank you for the conversation. I don't know what next week's conversation is going to be, but this one, you've helped me think through it better. And that, I'm just one guy, but we had some participants and other people will watch this later. So thank you.
I would just say, invite you to click, John, click through some of those links. And what you'll see is, like, some of them are like, oh, that doesn't seem like a bad idea. And then some of them, your eyes will just get really big.
Cool. All right. Have a wonderful weekend, you all. Thanks again for the show, Professor. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.